Hello everybody and welcome to a Detail Diatribe where today we are going to be chatting, a little fireside chat between Red and I about a fun movie that came out not recently. This month, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness came out, but we're not talking about that movie. We're talking about Doctor Strange, the original Doctor Strange from 2016. It came out right before Civil War, I think. Yeah.
I guess that's right, but it doesn't sound right.
We're going to talk about a favorite scene of mine that I've appreciated since I first saw this movie when it came out, and that is the "It's Not About You" scene, which really encapsulates Doctor Strange's compellingly fraught road to heroism. So what do you say, Red? Any quick thoughts about Doctor Strange before we jump in?
Well, I would say that, first of all, for those of you who did not remember the line, "It's not about you," this is the slow-motion lightning bolt scene. I know it's like 50%. People remember, oh yeah, what a fantastically beautiful conversation, and 50% are like, God, I can't unsee the effects in that.
The snow!
Yeah, but so Doctor Strange was a very fun movie. I felt like a solid 30% of it was just the VFX department being like, look what we can do, and I've got no complaints. I thought visually it was one of the most stunning movies Marvel had ever produced, and
yeah, even still it holds up because they're so inventive with the landmark gimmick of that movie was the fractals and the mirror dimension and stuff. But they are just so much more creative in how they use effects. I like it because it felt different and it felt like they tried.
Yeah, I mean, the Doctor Strange comics were always some of the most visually absurd of all the comic runs. They were the ones that went completely bonkers with just the visual design, the Kirby dots, all that stuff. And translating that to a realistic 3D animation, that's an interesting challenge. And, almost all of the later Marvel movies were sort of drawing on that stuff. Doctor Strange did a really good job with it. And
Colors,
Yeah, and Doctor Strange is also one of the rare late-game Marvel movies that works as a standalone. One of my documented complaints about the later MCU is that after a while, after Avengers, once they were like, we're building up to Endgame, we're building up to Infinity War, everything kind of became a prequel to Thanos. But Doctor Strange was one of those rare movies that A, held up on its own, and B, really felt like it was expanding the universe and the ideas of what was possible, what characters we might be expecting. And I've got my own grievances with introducing multiverses into stories because I think they flatten the stakes into the floor. But Doctor Strange and his dimension hopping and his dimensions and other, weird magical stuff he deals with, that's a lot of fun stuff that's just, it's like introducing in, John Constantine, He's dealing with all kinds of weird shit that nobody else deals with, and it adds a layer of just wacky fun times that I think the MCU really needed, and hopefully they use it well,
Yeah, so on paper, this movie should not work because it's like, wow, white boy gets superpowers. Again, haven't seen this one before in the daring continuity of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
But to their credit, there is not a lady character present who's trained her whole life to do exactly the same thing and then he gets it immediately. So avoiding that trope is pretty impressive on their part because they didn't do that shit in Ant-Man, they didn't do that shit in there's other examples, but you know what I mean. The stock narrative of oh, this guy's the chosen one. She trained her whole life for it, but this guy, his name is on a scroll somewhere. None of that for Doctor Strange. So, points for creativity.
He is just a regular guy.
Yep.
He's not prophesied. He just kind of shows up, and that's part of why it works. Because at this point, we're at Marvel Origin movie number 7. If we count the original Avengers team and then a couple other ones sprinkled in there, like Ant-Man, like you mentioned. So when we're this far deep in the MCU canon, why are we still doing this? When superpower obtainment can be quickly explained in flashbacks, they did that with Spider-Man in Civil War, and there are only so many ways you can really say with great power comes great responsibility. So at this point, the formula of admirable everyman plus cool new powers equals surprise fantastic new hero, it's a little played out. For the past 3 of those movies before Doctor Strange that had done a tremendous amount to differentiate themselves thematically or tonally beyond, okay, but these are the new powers that they get instead of those other powers that other guy got.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you actually make this movie interesting? And that's to flip the script. So instead of taking a character that is already demonstrating heroic attributes and then adding powers, such as Steve Rogers, who was already upstanding and courageous, Tony Stark was already inventive and successful, Thor was already loyal and the Prince of Asgard, you flip it. So Doctor Strange is, he's a person. He is a world-renowned surgeon, which is cool and impressive, but even the addition of dimension-hopping crazy magic stuff doesn't instantly make him heroic, because his early characterization is, in fact, fundamentally unheroic.
It's an interesting twist on the script for sure. The thing is, they've done movies where it's like protagonist must learn to be a better person before. Essentially, the only Marvel hero that didn't have to do that was Steve Rogers. The whole point of him was that Captain America was not created in a lab. Captain America was born and then got buff in a lab. Whereas Tony Stark, he's introduced in kind of a similar way to Doctor Strange, but what I really like about Doctor Strange is that he's kind of a terrible person in a very human way. Whereas Tony Stark and Thor are also introduced as like egotistical jerks who need to be taken down a few pegs before they can sort of rebuild and get better. Because Tony Stark, he deals weapons. He's a cool guy. He's a real egomaniac. And then everything goes to and he sort of has to, save his own life, build a giant robot suit. And then he decides like, okay, I've cleaned up my mess, but I got to clean up the rest of my mess. And that's where his newfound sense of responsibility kind of comes in and sort of puts him on the path to heroism and turns him against some of his former weapons-dealing allies. And with Thor, he was a very standard, arrogant, hot-headed young prince type, and then he gets banished, and he has to, he's had his powers taken away. He needs to sort of chill out and learn to appreciate people and be less of a huge dick, and when he does, he gets his powers back and everything's chill. Doctor Strange has that sort of everything goes to moment, and then he reacts like a human being would. He's not happy. He's not having some big moments of like, wow, I should be selfless. He's even more focused on himself because he's miserable. And that makes him drive these people away instead of having this moment of like clarity and wow, I should be better. He's like, no, this blows. My entire life is ruined. And it's a very human breakdown. And we've probably all experienced like, something bad happens to you, you have a really bad day, and you snap at these people who you care about, and you do these things that are self-destructive, but, you're sort of self-pitying, so you can't stop yourself. And that's what I think is interesting about Doctor Strange. We don't see him at a high point. We don't even really see him doing all that well or handling things gracefully. He's just a mess, and then we get to see him start climbing up.
Yeah, so pretty much nail on the head. Doctor Strange begins this movie as a categorical, full-blown asshole.
Yeah.
And the inciting incident of him is, of course, the accident that loses his hands. But his character journey begins far before that because he is a colossal ass. And the way in which he treats people makes him even more unlikable than actual arms dealer Tony Stark at the beginning of Iron Man 1. Because like you said, Tony has a big ego, but he's got actually admirable characteristics that are completely lacking from Stephen Strange as he begins this movie. So let's quickly run down the list and see what's going on.
Sounds good.
He is an ass to his colleagues, belittling anyone who has dared to be less smart than him, savoring all the glory for himself and then shunting everybody off to the side. And in this image here, you can see literally Doctor Strange is in the spotlight and the other doctor is just kind of like slinking off in the corner after having been told off for not recognizing some very obscure detail of why this patient was actually savable all along.
Yeah.
He's an ass to his patients because he only takes cases that will make him more glorious and renowned and doesn't take any case that could threaten to, ruin his perfect record. So as he's, relishing the challenge, he still only treats this like a game and demonstrably does not actually care about saving people.
Yeah, he's in this very interesting, sweet spot of very plausible kind of dickhead. Like, Tony Stark is mostly an asshole when he's introduced because he's pretty completely divorced from reality. He makes weapons because he clearly enjoys the process of creation and tinkering and pushing himself and creating newer, better things. It's only when he's in the cave with the guy who's like, yeah, my village was totally destroyed by your weapons. He's like, oh, my weapons hurting people? And then, it kind of reframes it. Like, Tony Stark is the kind of genius who does not think outside his very narrow range of interest. It's a big ADD mood. Whereas Doctor Strange is very grounded in reality. And he's got so much, how to describe, even at this point in the movie where he's an ordinary human, it's like he's power mad. He's like, I'm wealthy, I'm successful, I'm skilled. Nobody can beat me at what I do. I'm the best there is, and that's why I can be a huge dickhead to everybody, because nobody can stop me. It's
theoretically noble actions for a fundamentally non-noble motivation, to borrow the scheme from The Good Place, where even if you do good things, if you do them for bad reasons, you're still a bad person, and that's very much him. He's also an ass to his colleague and former love interest, Dr. Christine Palmer, who outright in the first handful of minutes of the movie says that the relationship was always about him. And after she comes to bring him some food and supplies after he gets into his big accident and comes to this apartment that is now empty, as he has sold almost all of his belongings to pay for progressively more ridiculous surgeries to try and fix his hands, he mocks her for caring about him, as if her pity is an insult against his honor. So he cannot do nice things and cannot notice when nice things are done to him. The concept of wanting to help people for a reason other than self-satisfying glory is completely alien to Strange. So he yells at her and almost curses her out of the apartment, which is a real dick move.
Also, that's the part where she says there are other things that can give your life meaning, and he says, like what? Like you, as I recall. Yeah. And that's a huge moment, because like if you know like anything about storytelling, you were expecting the like you or like me kind of, your life doesn't have to be about your extremely successful career. It could be about me, your bland love interest. And I kind of like appreciate that he's simultaneously like spitting that so venomously, like, no, none of this matters. Only my hands and my skill and my power matter, because like that's exactly what he would be thinking right now. It's like, oh yeah, my entire career is down the tubes, but at least I have a girlfriend. Like, he wouldn't think that, and I actually kind of appreciated that. It was still a huge dick move to say, because he was throwing all of her concern back in her face, but again, it's a very human thing. It's like we watch a movie where someone's like, yeah, the world may be burning down, but at least I have you, love interest of the week. And it's like, that doesn't seem very realistic to me. I feel like maybe you'd be more upset. Love does not conquer all. Sometimes there are real problems. And I thought it was very interesting. I think the way that Strange is written at this part of the movie is coming from a very genuine understanding of the way humans react in crisis and tragedy. And the fact that he's just spiraling and pushing everybody away because he's so destabilized. He's lost the one thing that gave him all that power that he was relying on. And it's so interesting to me that a character who is introduced using power to be a selfish dickhead then gains pretty much ultimate cosmic power and doesn't use it to be a dickhead. Because of the copious amounts of character development he undergoes. Not immediately. It's a process. We'll get there.
Yeah, one step further, we see him being an ass to his medical caretakers, belittling the other doctors who tried to save his hands, even though they saved his life, suggesting that they didn't do as good of a job as he would have, and therefore they're terrible. And he's also very ungrateful to his physical therapist, who's helping him to rehabilitate his hands, even calling him bachelor's degree as his name, which is probably the single worst thing he does in this entire intro, because that's not even like, oh, I'm more important than you. It's going out of his way to make someone feel terrible because they don't have a surgeon's
doctorate
training or it's like that's just like primo assholery. And finally, he's an ass to his magic teachers. After we skip through the second act, he gets to Kamartaj and starts to learn magic. He's constantly disrespecting the people who are trying to teach him things, studying, like a good student after school, but then also being a dick in class, in a line from the Ancient One, who, after telling him to silence his ego, directly compares his garbage personality with the villain Caecilius, which is a bad sign. Villain foils are a thing that happens, but you can understand why the Ancient One's like, oh, this guy sucks.
I don't really remember Caecilius having that much personality, to be honest, but, the fairly standard, oh, I'm going to dabble in evil magic so it gives me a quickie, route to power, all that stuff. That's pretty standard villain stuff. And
he has his own thematic thing that was almost a different Detail Diatribe, and the themes of time and timelessness. But Caecilius does actually have some interesting stuff under the hood, but we don't get a ton of his actual personality. He's more of a philosophical antagonist than a personally invested one, because he and Strange don't know each other. They don't really care. They're just kind of business antagonists more than anything else.
And we don't really need Strange and Caecilius to both have that much going on. Strange is enough of a mess on his own that Caecilius is allowed to be a little flat.
That's the thing. Strange is enough of his own antagonist that he doesn't need anyone to get in his way. He's the only thing in his way right now. So even after he learns magic, it still doesn't make him suck less, because he still thinks that his one redeeming quality of good surgeon is gone. And then even all this magic stuff can't fix that. It can't take him back in time to before he lost his hands. It can't give him his glory back. So when he is informed of the cosmic threat of Dormammu, he doesn't care. He's like, sorry guys, I only came here to save my hands, and as soon as I do that, I'm gone.
Yeah.
Bye. So even though the magic is cool, he's still selfish. Even though he saved the New York Sanctum, he still doesn't care.
And it helps because not only is that true, Strange is also not a very good magician at this point, or sorcerer or whatever. He's decent, but like he's constantly being outclassed by these people with more training. And I like that because I feel like it would have been very bad for him personality and character development wise if he had taken to magic really easily and quickly, and that would have, I think, encouraged him to switch focus of like, oh, you know, who needs to be a kick-ass surgeon when I'm a kick-ass wizard instead? No, the fact that he kind of sucks at it, the fact that we see him struggling in class to even do the basics of the sling ring thing. Although I gotta say, when he's doing that and he's doing the circle and it's just firing out a few sparks, I'd be like, normal people cannot make sparks appear out of midair. I know it's not as impressive as your classmates, but that's still magic. You're still doing magic.
No, if Strange isn't the best, he might as well have failed.
Yeah.
It's still the case that this chip on his shoulder of like, but my hands is the one thing that's holding him up, and he's still, you know, acting his usual selfish self.
Yeah.
So, question is, can anything make him suck less? And at this point in the movie, no. Even like an hour and a half in, the answer is no.
No.
Because after this big fight with Caecilius, he says, he's done with sorcery, I'm out. And the Ancient One suggests that he became a doctor to not save other lives, but to save one above all the rest, and that is his own. And to this, you know, slight barb, he immediately shoots back with the accusation that the Ancient One uses dark magic to give herself eternal life. It is telling that faced with the slightest criticism, Doctor Strange leverages the worst accusation he can possibly throw at someone and just shoots that right back.
Strange at this point in the movie is a deeply insecure person. He starts the movie very secure because he knows exactly who he is and what he can do, and then he loses the one thing he's good at, and even now, magic, wizards, all that cool shit, he still does not feel confident or secure in himself, which is why he lashes back so harshly. He can't take the slightest further injury to his ego or his body because he's already like hanging by a thread of civility to like function around people because he's just a bundle of nerves right now. And it's, again, he's a huge dickhead. But like when you are freaking out and in pain and stressed and you don't see a way forward, it is very easy to lash out at everybody. Like it takes work to manage yourself under those circumstances. Like as a doctor, you'd think he would be aware that he's dealing mostly with people who are having the worst days of their lives and need help to function. And instead, he never deals with that. He does the surgery. Everyone he deals with is unconscious, and then he leaves all the hard part to everybody else. He has never had to be the patient being managed. He's got absolutely no compassion, even as he is just on the other side of the coin. And it's all so real and grounded in the way that people work under stress. And I think that's what makes him work, because even now, as he's being a colossal ass, we're like, I get it. I'm not condoning it. I think he should be managing this better. I think he should know better, especially considering the field he worked in. But he's in a lot of pain. He still doesn't know what he's doing with his life. He doesn't see a way forward that isn't getting his old life back. And that's what's driving him forward. He doesn't care about this Dormammu. It literally couldn't matter less to him. All he cares about is the one thing he wants, which is being who he was before, getting that confidence and strength back.
So, to answer the question of can anything make him less of an egotistical ass, unfortunately for the Ancient One, the answer is yes.
No, not the
and that is
mentor.
getting dropped off the top rope and basically suplexed down a New York skyscraper. Doctor Strange takes her to the hospital, and his doctors cannot save her. So, Strange notices that the Ancient One astral projects out because he sees some screens getting a little wibbly. So, he astral projects out and then follows her as she's flying out of the hospital to the balcony, where we come to the scene. Half an hour into this detail diatribe, we approach the subject of this detail diatribe, which is them two on the balcony, astral projecting during a storm of lightning and snow as she is about to die. So quickly, I'll run through the dialogue, and then we'll get into what it means. Strange says, you have to return to your body, you don't have time. Ancient One says, time is relative, in parentheses, you big dumb idiot. I've spent so many years peering through time, looking at this exact moment, but I can't see past it. Strange says, you think this is where you die. And then she just immediately changes topic and says, you wonder what I see in your future? And Strange says, no. Then the Ancient One smiles at him, and he's like, okay, yeah. And she says, I never saw your future, because, again, she can't see past this moment. Only its possibilities. You have such capacity for goodness. You've always excelled, but not because you crave success, but because of your fear of failure. Strange says, it's what made me a great doctor. And the Ancient One says, it is precisely what kept you from greatness. Arrogance and fear still keep you from learning the simplest and most significant lesson of all. Strange asks, which is, and the Ancient One says, it's not about you. And she's like all this time in the conversation, she's looking outward to the storm, looking at the lightning and the snow. And then when she says it's not about you, she turns to him and is like, listen to me, please, begging him to internalize this one thing, that it's not about him. Then the Ancient One pivots off to explaining how the healing magic works, and that Strange could get his hands and his old life back if he used magic to like channel it into his hands and fix it, and the whole thing. Ancient One says, I mean, yeah, you could do that, but the world would be all the lesser for it. So they have a quick tangent about Mordo being a rules lawyer and killjoy, and when she says, only together will you be able to confront Dormammu, and Strange says, I'm not ready. And the final line is the Ancient One says, no one ever is. We don't get to choose our time. Death is what gives life meaning. To know your days are numbered, your time is short. You'd think that after all this time I'd be ready, but look at me. Stretching one moment out into 1,000 just so I can watch the snow. And as she's holding Doctor Strange's hand in this last moment, she lets it go and then she disappears. And he is left with her gone, staring over the balcony out into the lightning storm over the river. So yeah. It's a pretty heavy scene for such a small word count. And this is really the entire thing that everything hinges on, because the secret word is control. Stephen always wanted control over his hands and his life, over other people. But even if someone like the Ancient One couldn't control death, the only viable strategy is to relinquish control and accept that, it's not about you. And as she is accepting her fate, knowing that she's going to die in seconds, she's still filled with joy. She's joking with Strange and smiling at him in delight, like, haha, I see right through you. You think that you don't want me to tell you your future. I know you do. So even in this moment, because she's relinquished control, she's able to kind of, enjoy it and actually revel in the beauty of the scene that she's seeing and appreciate having this one last conversation with her friend. It's very nice to see the way in which the Ancient One is setting an example for Strange by giving up control, and Strange will hopefully now be able to follow it.
Yeah, I almost wonder if the decision to make this conversation happen during a storm was so important, because a storm is nothing but chaos. And when you slow down a lightning bolt, the way it works is very interesting, but if you slow down a lightning bolt, what you see is all these different step leaders carving their way through the atmosphere, ionizing in completely random directions. They're not trying to find the Earth. They're going in random directions until one of them, through Brownian motion, hits the ground and then strikes back up along the same line that it just carved. And it's a completely chaotic, uncontrollable process that's normally so fast we can't see it. And in the meantime, the Ancient One is watching this process play out in super slow motion, contemplating how peaceful it is to acknowledge that you cannot control the world. And the thing is, they are, respectively at their cores, an anciently super powerful sorcerer and a surgeon, two people who by all rights have the most control any of us can have over the Earth and life and death. I'm reminded of... There's a manga called Blackjack about the world's greatest surgeon. He's a total weirdo. It's very fun. But there's a couple issues where he has to keep relearning the lesson that surgeons are not gods. They can't control life and death. Sometimes, you do your best, you make no mistakes, and the patient still dies. And every time it totally freaks him out and upsets him, because you have to try your best. That's the point. But the message that Strange needs to internalize that, hey, as a surgeon saving lives, as a sorcerer saving lives, you have to remember that none of this is about you. It's about the people whose lives you're saving, you dingus.
That's part of why this moment clicks for Strange more than others, because this is an experience he's never had before, losing a patient. He's never done that. He only picks the cases that he he can win.
Yeah.
So being in this situation, feeling very, very acutely this lesson of you're not a god, you can't control life and death. It's cool because, jumping kind of out a layer, it's a very neat little piece of Stoic philosophy that's integrated into the theming of this story, that to struggle against the hand of fate and try to trudge backwards up the current of time, it's not going to work. 0 stars. You can't do it. You can't just click the undo button and go back. You have to work with the hands that you're dealt, and only in accepting the things you can't control and, again, letting go of ego can you actually, maybe begin to have a good time with things, even if something goes to shit. Because once the pressure's off, you can just kind of go. You can do it, and you can live without having to be so preoccupied with worries and fears of failure, because that stuff's just gonna happen. It's telling that in this last moment, all that the Ancient One has left is her friend and the snow, and she's savoring both of those things. And it's it's helpful that this scene is so visually gorgeous, because we're able to kind of put ourselves in the Ancient One's position of really just reveling at this beautiful scene that's laid out in front of us, and thinking if this was the last thing I saw, that wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah.
It's a testament to how much more beautiful even the smallest things can be when you look at them gratefully rather than expectantly or deservingly.
The thing about Strange needing to be in control ties in with how I described him earlier as insecure, because insecurity and fear of failure are very similar things. Essentially, they're both sort of sitting there in the back of your head, really tense, waiting for you to mess up and everything to catastrophically fall apart. That's the ultimate fear of it. And the reason why Strange is always picking these things is you don't pick the case that you can't succeed at. Even so, he's never considering this is a person who's going to die and there's a chance I might be able to fix that. None of that registers to him. He's just well, if I mess up, or, even if I don't mess up but they die anyway, I wouldn't have done a good enough job, and that reflects poorly on me. That's all he can think about. It's all turned inward on him judging himself and holding himself up to this metric. And the thing is, at the beginning of the movie, he's this total confident dickhead because he is in control. He's constructed an environment that is perfect for him. He has control over everything. And the accident that happens is because he's an overconfident asshole who's driving like an idiot. And that's all bad. But there's ways that could have worked out for him. It didn't have to go that way, but it did, because he wasn't in control of his life. Sometimes bad things happen no matter what you do. And in this case, it gave him a career-ending injury, and he just couldn't accept that because he was staring down his nightmare scenario of, I lost control and I failed in the most catastrophic way possible and ended my career and my life. That's what he's been dealing with this whole movie, literally just this rolling consequence of him messing up in the worst way. So of course all he thinks he can do is fix it. Get back to where he was, get back to that perfect position of perfect control, and instead the Ancient One kind of makes him step back and be like, your entire premise is flawed. You cannot control these things. The world is so much bigger than that, and you need to allow yourself to sort of see that and breathe it in and recognize that there's beauty in not being able to control what happens. And he's just left alone on the balcony staring out at the lightning bolt and the snow, recognizing that he's in the middle of this chaos he can't control, and it is beautiful and serene, even as he's living in this tragedy of having just lost, a mentor and a close friend. And a patient. Yeah. The patient is another important part. He's also staring down the surgeon's nightmare scenario he never dealt with in his whole career, because he managed to keep the winning streak going right up until he wrecked his own career.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's all of these nightmare scenarios coming to a head all at once that actually make it click. And you even get a sense in this conversation that he kind of realizes what's happening, because he admits, I'm not ready, which is the only negative thing that he says about himself in the entire movie, with the exception of saying that all humans are brief specks in an uncaring universe. And to that, the Ancient One actually says you think too little of yourself, which is probably more telling.
Well, that's the thing. That's the
than
kind
anything else we get earlier.
That's the kind of easy nihilism that lets you dismiss everything that could make your life better or more actually wholesome. It's so easy if you think, oh, we're just brief specs in an uncaring universe. Then if anything goes catastrophically wrong, you're like, that's it. I'm a brief spec in an uncaring universe determined to destroy me. Like, people hear uncaring universe and they think cruel universe that's out to get me, not incredibly complex and chaotic panoply that I can observe and experience in the time I have in it. You know, brief spec in an uncaring universe is a casual way of Strange dismissing literally every human life and experience while still having the satisfaction of him being like, but I've got my shit together and I'm better than all of you specs. Yeah. I'm hanging in the best sunbeam in this cold, uncaring universe. He's got nothing to fall back on when everything goes to crap. All he can think of is this crushing nihilism that he's just been sort of using as a shield to avoid thinking about anybody like real human beings. And it's when he's forced to confront the enormity of life experience and the people he's been dismissing and himself and what people are actually capable of, when he has to acknowledge that the parts of his life he's been looking at are only the parts he could control. And that's why he felt so trapped, because when he lost control, the space of things that he felt safe in was so tiny and, like, uncontrollable. And now he's like, if I look at the parts of the world that I can't control, it's huge and beautiful, and actually I can maybe work with it. But he was so terrified of it that he couldn't see it before, and that's why he was focusing way too close and way too small on only the goal of fixing his hand so he can get back into his nice, comfortable, single niche. And that's why the Ancient One, the first thing she does is punch him out of his body and make him confront the enormity of the universe.
Yep.
And he doesn't get it, but it was important that she did it. So
yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
It's incremental steps. And we get a little bit of it in other movies that, you know, the Ancient One knew Strange was coming. We see that in Endgame, where it's like, oh, it's Doctor Strange? Yeah, no, you're 5 years too early.
I love that. I love how she casually just knows everything.
Yeah. But even in that movie, in Endgame, she says, like, oh, well, if Strange gave up the Time Stone, then clearly he had a reason. She still trusts him implicitly, even though she hasn't met him yet. So it must be so difficult for her as a teacher to deal with this person who, like, you see in front of you sucks so bad, yet you know that they go on to be, as she says, the best of us. And the Ancient One can trust him enough to make her own death not about her. Then this is the moment where Strange realizes that maybe his entire life shouldn't be just about him. Mm-hmm. So that takes us into the final act. There's a really cool reverse time fight in Hong Kong that just kicks so much ass.
So good.
Beautiful visuals. Such a creative set piece beyond just like, yes, we're going to go punch people in a planeless void next to a skybeam. After the Ancient One dies, our Doc knows what he needs to do. So we fast forward to the final showdown. He goes up to meet Dormammu and has the bargaining scene where he throws on a time loop spell and says, Dormammu, I've come to bargain. And then he kills him.
Yep.
And then Strange comes back and says, Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Dormammu's like, I'm sorry, what? So he traps Dormammu in a time loop, constantly killing Doctor Strange over and over again. But Dormammu's stuck in this moment, so he can't eat the Earth, and everybody on Earth will live because Doctor Strange is constantly making this sacrifice. So mechanically, this is a very clever trick to use time thematically as a weapon against the, timeless deity. But it's also the moment where Doctor Strange finally, after making all of his realizations and journeying up to this point, becomes a hero because he's overcoming his fundamental fear of failure. He lets go of his ego and he lets himself fail, dying painfully for all of eternity, with no one knowing that Strange is saving them, but doing this because it saves everybody, not for glory, but because he knows it's the right thing to do. And only after he realizes that it's not about him can he actually make this choice and use that big clever brain of him to put a plan like this into motion. So it's the marriage of his genius and now finally his heroism coming together into this gambit, this bargaining ploy that will actually be able to save humanity from Dormammu.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And one thing I actually like about it that's a little separate from the parts of it that you've already brought up is that it's not like he's fixing the fact that he dies every time. He dies fully. He clearly remembers it. Like, the fact that his tone changes with every I've come to bargain, the fact that by the end he's like, I've come to bargain, I've come to bargain, all these takes. But, like, by the end it's just like, the whole thing with the Ancient One, I feel like it would be easy to almost undercut it if it was implied that, like, oh, Strange found a way to fix dying, to reverse it. But it's like, well, it's a very specialized spell he came up with that he's using the time stone to maintain. And also, it's not like he's not dying. It just resets him a little bit. He still knows what happened. It still sucks. It still counts as a failure. And, you know, the thing is, as mentioned, he only ever took cases he knew he could succeed at. And then it's like, what's up? This is Dormammu. He's an interdimensional god, basically. You want to go try and stop him? Everyone thinks it's impossible. And it's like, Strange at any previous point in the movie would have been like, no, what? No. But this Strange is like, I think I got it. All I have to do is f up constantly. And it's like, okay, sure, whatever.
So even with all his knowledge of magic from earlier, without that turn and realizing it's not about him, he never would have been able to do this. It's a very cool set piece that even before I really sat down and thought about it, I was like, this is good. This is a good hero final battle moment, because it's almost the lack of a big glorious fight that makes it thematically work.
It's one of the only Marvel movies where they don't end with like a big punch fight and like a sky beam.
Yeah.
So
it is a problem you cannot punch. You can only solve it through painful, gratuitous, repeated self-sacrifice. And that is really, really cool for a movie that starts with a doctor who doesn't give a shit about whether anyone else lives or dies.
Yep.
And that, of course, takes us to the end of the movie, where we get a victory from failure and heroism from Doctor Strange's selflessness. He did lose his hands, and now the world is all the greater for it. The final shot of the movie is him putting back on the broken watch that he got from Christine that was destroyed when he was in Kathmandu, Nepal, accepting at once his losses of his hands in his career and taking comfort in, finally submitting to time and yielding to its current. This one shot of his hands, the watch, and his robes very neatly encapsulates everything that's going on in this movie, and I find that very clever as a way to wrap it up.
Thinking about this as the fundamental core of Doctor Strange's arc, it's interesting to me. As mentioned, we haven't watched Multiverse of Madness, but I did watch the What If episode that features an alternate Doctor Strange, and I'm thinking that it's interesting how many versions of Doctor Strange don't quite seem to internalize this lesson correctly, and they still fixate on maintaining control at all costs and going to greater and greater lengths. Like, as we see before the Ancient One's death, that's a pattern he falls into very easily. He finds a failure unacceptable, and he just drives himself mad trying to find a way to succeed, to eventually make it work. I mean, surgery after surgery on his hands, trying to get them better. It's like, after a while, that's seriously diminishing returns. He's a surgeon. He should know that. He does know that, but he's desperate. There has to be a way.
It's him, therefore it'll work.
Yeah, it's unacceptable that there can't be a way to fix this thing. And so in the multiverse stuff and all that jazz, as I understand it, it's like, what you have at the end of this movie is a Doctor Strange who fully understands the dangers of not acknowledging that things are beyond your power while also being one of the most powerful people in the world.
It's a potent combination.
Yeah.
And that's why I like, of all the Marvel movies that we've enjoyed, few go to such a length in imparting a thematic lesson for the audience, and this is truly the rare Marvel movie that actually says something, along with probably, by my count, Winter Soldier and Black Panther being the other two.
Yeah.
And like we said with the Dormammu fight, it's not about conquering the bad guys, it's about conquering yourself. And this is one of very few films in the superhero canon, even outside of Marvel, that actually tell the audience how that works and show that process, which is why I love this movie so much. And it's easily one of my favorite superhero movies beyond just a Marvel movie. So
yeah,
I find this movie very special. It is the most philosophically complex of probably any of the superhero movies I've seen, because it really is so focused on this slow progression of a pure asshole learning how stoicism works and understanding powers greater than them. That is very neatly nestled in with the thematic conflict between time and no time. Dormammu being the timeless void, and Strange literally using time as a weapon against him. Yeah. It's very cleverly put together, and it comes together in a very nice package. So
yeah,
that's all I've got to say about this movie. Red, any final thoughts before we
wrap it in the rare sub-hour Detail Diatribe? I think that it is interesting that, as mentioned, Strange has a motif of time from the very beginning, because of course you can't really have time without change. That's ultimately the entire premise of the concept. Time is the way that things change as they progress. You can't have change without time. You can't have time without change. But Strange begins the movie frozen in a status quo that he's clearly extremely comfortable in. And then, through his own arrogance and stupidity, he ruins it for himself and ends up changing in a way he really doesn't like, and then spends the whole movie trying to wind it back. And then at the end of the movie, he can rewind time, but only to sacrifice himself to save the world. So, it's sort of I thought I wanted this, but I actually didn't, and I thought this would make me happy, but I actually, it's actually this other thing. I think it's a great journey. I think it's almost like, obviously this is an origin movie, but it doesn't feel like a lot of superhero origin movies, which almost don't feel like complete stories in and of themselves. A lot of origin movies feel like, okay, now we've got the piece on the board, and now we can do interesting stuff with it. But this movie feels like a complete story. Like, we want to see more Doctor Strange stuff, but it's like his arc is in a really good place. So, I think it's a very good movie. I should probably rewatch it. I think I only saw it once, but...
It's good.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah.
I watched it back, I'm like, wow, this is nice.
It holds up.
Yeah, if that's all we've got, then, bye.
Bye.